the sewing tutorial for this boat neck button-down top. I have the pattern available on my Etsy, Sewing with Jenn, if you guys want to follow along. It's a classic style featuring darts along the front and back bodice, button closure, and French binding. It's very beginner friendly and perfect for light to mid-weight fabrics like cotton blends like poplin, Oxford, chambray. In this tutorial, I'm using linen. The pattern is layered separately by size for easier cutting. Off to the left is the layers icon. Toggle off the sizes you don't want and make sure to leave the piece info visible. To print, leave the orientation at auto, actual or 100% scale, and the style is only 12 pages, so it's not too crazy. So let's get right into it. We're going to start off with the darts, marking the dart points and the dart legs. For the front dart, make sure to mark the stopping point in the middle. We'll be leaving open space between the dart and the hemline as a design detail, so it kind of flares out along the bottom. Next, we're going to fold the darts in half, right sides together, lining up the notches and making sure the point is right along the folded edge. So for the bust darts and the back darts, we'll start at the seam allowance with some back stitches to secure the thread. And we're just going to sew down the dart legs towards the dart point, gradually narrowing down so we can get that tapered finish. Once you get to the point, leave a few inches of extra thread at the ends and knot it by hand. I like using a straight edge like this, and I just line it up to the point just to make sure I'm at a good angle. Now for the front dart, we're going to start sewing from this midsection that we had marked previously. Remember to sew a few back stitches to secure the thread and sew it like how we did before. Now that the darts are all finished, we're going to give everything a really good press. For the back darts, we'll press them towards the side seams. For the bust darts, we'll press them downwards. And for the front darts, we're actually going to open them and press them flat. So center the dart seam line all the way down to the hem. I like to pinch along the bottom and use my fingers to just push the center down. Iron it in place, and you can see it kind of looks like an inverted box pleat. Next, we have the placket facing. I already ironed on the fusible inner facing, and as you guys can see, I like to trim off the seam allowance of the inner facing before I iron it so it's less bulk. So we're just going to line up the facing to the center front, right sides together, and sew it in place. Trim and grade the excess seam allowance. So I'm leaving about 1/8 seam allowance along the facing and a 1/4 inch seam allowance along the front, and this just helps with reducing bulk. Before we fold the facing over, I like to press the seams open, and this just helps to get a really nice crisp fold line. Now for the other side of the facing, we have a raw edge. So we're going to fold and press the seam allowance in towards the wrong side, and then fold the placket over right along the seam line and turn it right sides out so that the raw edges are now all hidden. Press one more time and edge stitch along the folded edge. To attach the front and back, we're just going to line up the side seams and shoulder seams right sides together and stitch it in place. For the armhole binding, we're going to join the ends together by overlapping at a 90-degree angle, right sides together. We're just going to stitch it down diagonally, corner to corner, and then trim off the excess seam allowance and press the seams open. Option 1 for attaching the binding. So I'm going to show you guys two different ways you can attach the binding. Both techniques work great and both have the same outcome. It really just depends on your preference. For the first technique, I'll be showing you guys an example on another top that I'm working on just so you guys can see. So we'll start by folding the binding in half lengthwise, wrong sides together, and press. We'll then line up the raw edges of the binding and the armhole right sides together. Stitch it in place and then trim and grade the excess seam allowance. Now we're going to press the binding up and then flip it completely over towards the inside so that the raw edges are all hidden, and then edge stitch it in place. Option 2 for attaching the binding. So now for the second technique, I'm going to go back to the original top that we were working on. So instead of folding the binding in half lengthwise as we did previously, we're going to keep it single layer and line up the binding to the armhole and neckline right sides together. After we've stitched it in place, we're going to trim off the excess seam allowance. Now for the opposite edge, we're going to fold and press the raw edge in towards the wrong side of the binding, and then fold it again a second time so that the binding is now only visible from the inside. The binding should be about 3/8 inch wide, so trim any excess seam allowance if you need to. And remember, we'll need to turn the ends inward along the center front and then edge stitch it in place. And as you guys can see, both techniques have very similar outcomes, and I just wanted to show you guys different variations of how you could attach the binding, but I'm curious to know which one you guys prefer, so let me know in the comments. For the hem, we'll do a folded edge. So we're just going to fold the raw edge towards the wrong side, a 1/4 inch. Fold it again a second time, another 1/4 inch, so that the raw edge is now hidden, and press it in place. You'll notice that it might feel really bulky at the placket and at the back darts, so we're going to trim off some excess. Since we've already pressed it, we can undo the folds and should be able to see the crease marks. Now, very carefully cut away the areas that are double layered, so along the placket and the back darts. Make sure to not cut past the crease line. We don't want to have any frayed edges. Once that's done and we've reduced the bulk, we can now double fold the hemline back how we had it and edge stitch it in place. Lastly, the buttons and buttonholes. So use the template to mark the placement. Traditionally for women's tops, it's right over left. So if the garment is laying flat, the buttonholes are on the left side and the buttons are on the right. The settings to sew the buttonholes are really going to vary depending on the machine you have as well as the material you're using. So make sure to do a test round and make sure the buttonholes are a good size and the buttons slide through. My machine is an automatic one-step, so I've switched over to the buttonhole presser foot with the button I'm using set at the button plate, pulling this lever down and back and making sure the threads are under the presser foot. So my machine stitches the buttonhole from front to back, so I'm lining up the needle to the bottom of my marked buttonhole. And once it's all done, I'm just going to use my seam ripper and cut a slit for the opening, and then hand sew the buttons on. And finally, we're all finished. I love this neckline and the dart detail along the front. Let me know if you guys have any questions, and thanks for being here.